Courtney Cox had barely settled into her chair when Sunny Hostin fired the first shot. No warm-up questions about her latest project. No pleasantries about how great she looked. Just a direct hit that made the entire studio hold its breath. "Courtney, I want to start with something real," Sunny said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to play prosecutor. "You've been very open about regretting your cosmetic procedures, about having fillers dissolved and trying to look more natural. But isn't that just another form of privilege? You got the work done when it benefited your career, and now you get praise for undoing it. Meanwhile, regular women are still being told they're not enough." The View audience went silent. This was not the Friends reunion conversation anyone had expected. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because this confrontation is about to get intense. Courtney's smile, the one that had graced magazine covers for 4 decades, flickered but didn't disappear. She was a professional. She had been doing this since Sunny Hostin was still in law school. But there was something in her eyes that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical interview. "That's an interesting way to start a conversation," Sunny, Courtney replied, her voice measured. "I've been honest about my journey with cosmetic procedures because I think honesty helps other women. I made choices I regret. I've talked about why. I'm not sure how being open about mistakes is a form of privilege." "But that's exactly my point," Sunny pressed, leaning forward with the intensity of a cross-examination. "You had the privilege of making those choices in the first place. You had the money, the access, the ability to try things and then undo them when you decided you didn't like the results. Most women don't have that luxury. They're stuck with whatever they can afford, or they're stuck with aging naturally while being told they're invisible." The accusation hung in the air. Whoopi shifted in her chair. Joy watched with unusual silence. Sarah seemed to be calculating whether to intervene. "You're right that I've had access that many women don't have," Courtney said slowly. "But I'm not sure what you want me to do with that observation. Apologize for having a career that paid well. Stay silent about my experiences because other people can't afford the same options. How does that help anyone?" Sunny wasn't backing down. "What would help is if actresses like you were honest about the pressure instead of pretending it's all personal choice. You didn't get fillers because you woke up one day and thought it would be fun. You got them because Hollywood told you that you weren't allowed to age. And now you're being celebrated for going natural. As if that's not just another performance for a different audience." The word performance seemed to strike something in Courtney. Her posture changed almost imperceptibly, straightening with a new tension. "Everything is a performance to you, isn't it, Sunny? Every choice a woman makes has to be analyzed for hidden motives. I can't just be someone who made mistakes and learned from them. I have to be either a victim of the system or a perpetrator of it. There's no room for me to just be a person trying to figure things out like everyone else." "I think there's plenty of room for nuance," Sunny replied. "But I also think celebrities have a responsibility to be honest about the systems they participate in. Friends ran for 10 years and had almost no diversity. You made millions from a show that pretended New York City was entirely white. Have you ever really reckoned with that?" The pivot from cosmetic procedures to Friends' lack of diversity was sharp and clearly calculated. Courtney's eyes widened slightly at the sudden shift. Friends was created in 1994. It reflected the television landscape of its time. Could it have been more diverse? Absolutely. Has the industry changed since then? I certainly hope so. But I was an actress on that show, Sunny. I didn't write it. I didn't cast it. I showed up and did my job. But you benefited from it. Sunny insisted. You became one of the most famous women in America from a show that excluded people who looked like me. And I've never heard you really address that. I've heard you talk about your face, your relationships, your friendships with your co-stars. But have you ever publicly grappled with the fact that your success came from a show that many people of color couldn't see themselves in? Courtney was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had a different quality. Lower, more deliberate. "Sunny, I need you to understand something. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. I know what exclusion looks like. I know what prejudice looks like. I'm not going to pretend that my experience as a white woman is the same as what black women face in this industry or anywhere else. But I also can't retroactively make Friends into a different show than it was." She leaned forward, her intensity now matching Sunny's. "What I can do is support diverse storytelling now. What I can do is use whatever influence I have to advocate for change in the industry. What I can do is be honest about the limitations of the era I came up in without pretending I had the power to single-handedly fix them." That sounds like a very carefully prepared response, Sunny said with a slight smirk. The kind of thing a publicist might write. The accusation of inauthenticity seemed to push Courtney past some invisible threshold. Her voice sharpened in a way the audience had never heard from her. You want unscripted, Sunny? Fine. Here's unscripted. I'm 60 years old. I've been in this business since I was dancing in a Bruce Springsteen video as a teenager. I've watched the industry change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I've adapted, evolved, survived in a business that throws women away the moment they stop being young and desirable. She paused, collecting herself, but her eyes never left Sunny's face. I've watched friends struggle with addiction and lose. I've watched talented women disappear because they refuse to play the game. I've watched men my age continue to thrive while women my age fight for scraps. And through all of it, I've kept showing up, kept working, kept trying to matter in an industry that would prefer. I just fade away quietly. Her voice was rising now, carrying an edge that seemed to fill the studio. I've been picked apart for every choice I've made. Too thin, then too enhanced, then too desperate to look young, then praised for finally accepting my age. I've been analyzed, criticized, psychoanalyzed by people who have never met me. And now I'm sitting here being lectured about privilege by someone who doesn't know the first thing about what my life has actually been like. Sunny's expression hardened. I'm not lecturing you. I'm asking you to be accountable. Accountable for what exactly? Courtney's voice was quiet now, but somehow more powerful. For being on a successful TV show, for getting older in public, for making decisions about my own face that I later regretted. What exactly is the crime I'm supposed to be confessing to here, Sunny? The crime is pretending that your experience is universal when it's not, Sunny replied. The crime is accepting praise for your honesty while never really being honest about the systems that created the problems in the first place. Courtney laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about systems? Let's talk about systems. Let's talk about how this industry works for women. You hit 40 and suddenly you're only offered roles as someone's mother. You hit 50 and you're lucky to work at all. You do anything to try to stay relevant, to stay employed, to stay visible, and you're criticized for being desperate. You accept aging naturally, and you're praised by the same people who would never hire you looking your age. She stood up, and the movement commanded immediate attention. I didn't create that system, Sunny. I survived it. And survival in this industry means making compromises that people who've never been in it can't understand. It means doing things you're not proud of because the alternative is disappearing. It means constantly recalibrating who you are based on what the market will accept. Sunny stood as well, unwilling to cede the physical advantage. But that's exactly the point. You survived. Many women don't. Many women can't afford the procedures. Can't afford to undo them. Can't afford to opt out of the system because they were never really in it to begin with. Your survival story is interesting, but it's not relatable to most women watching. And what would make it relatable? Courtney asked. If I pretended I didn't have advantages, if I apologized for having a successful career, if I flagellated myself for every benefit I've received, would that make you feel better about this interview, Sunny? Would that give you the moment you're clearly looking for? The accusation that Sunny was performing for cameras seemed to land somewhere uncomfortable. Her expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or might have been anger. I'm not looking for a moment. I'm looking for honesty. You've got honesty, Courtney replied, her voice steady but fierce. You've got a woman standing in front of you who has been completely transparent about her mistakes, her regrets, her struggles with the pressure to look a certain way. What you don't have is permission to use my honesty as a weapon against me. She shook her head slowly. You know what I find fascinating about this conversation? You're attacking me for being privileged while sitting at this table with a television contract that millions of people would kill for. You're lecturing me about the struggles of regular women while wearing designer clothes and full makeup for the cameras. You're demanding accountability from me while never examining your own position in the very system you're criticizing. The counterattack was sharp enough to make several audience members gasp. Sunny's face went through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. That's a false equivalence, and you know it. Is it? You have a platform. You have influence. You have the ability to shape how millions of people think about issues. What are you doing with that power besides tearing down women who've been in this fight longer than you've been on television? Sunny's voice rose. I'm having important conversations about representation and accountability. No, you're not, Courtney said firmly. You're creating controversy for ratings. You're using my face, my career, my choices as a springboard for whatever point you wanted to make before I even sat down. This isn't a conversation, Sunny. It's a prosecution. And I haven't committed any crime except being successful while female and aging while visible. Joy finally tried to intervene. Maybe we should take a step back. And no, Joy, Courtney said, her eyes never leaving Sunny's face. I think we should finish this because I came here expecting to have a real conversation about my work, my life, my experiences. Instead, I've been ambushed by someone who seems to think that tearing me down will somehow lift other women up. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that's okay. She turned to address the audience directly. I want to say something to everyone watching who has ever been made to feel bad about their choices. We're all just trying to figure it out. We're all making decisions with imperfect information and changing circumstances. Some of us have more resources than others. Some of us have advantages we didn't earn. But that doesn't mean our struggles aren't real. That doesn't mean our regrets aren't genuine. That doesn't mean we don't deserve compassion. Her voice softened slightly, but lost none of its power. I've made peace with my face. I've made peace with my age. I've made peace with the fact that I'll never look like I did when I was 30. And that's okay. What I haven't made peace with is the expectation that I should feel guilty for existing, for succeeding, for surviving in an industry that does everything it can to destroy women. She turned back to Sunny. You wanted honesty. Here it is. I'm tired. I'm tired of being analyzed. I'm tired of having every choice I make scrutinized for hidden meaning. I'm tired of being expected to represent all women while also being criticized for not being able to represent all women. I'm just one person, Sunny. I've done my best, and if my best isn't good enough for you, that's something you'll have to work out on your own. Sunny seemed to search for a response. I think you're taking this more personally than I intended. Am I? Courtney's eyebrow raised. You question my honesty. You called my openness a privilege that shouldn't be praised. You implied that my success was built on exclusion. You suggested that everything I've shared publicly is just another performance. And I'm taking it too personally. She gathered her composure with visible effort. Let me tell you something about being personal, Sunny. This face you're so interested in discussing. I watched it change in ways I didn't expect and couldn't control. I watched myself become someone I didn't recognize in the mirror. And when I finally decided to let go, to accept that I couldn't freeze time no matter how hard I tried, it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued. Not because of vanity, because this industry had spent 30 years telling me that my value was tied to my appearance, because I knew that letting go meant accepting that I might never work again. Because I was terrified of becoming invisible in a world that had only ever seen me as a pretty face with a sitcom role. The studio was absolutely silent now. Even Sunny seemed momentarily stilled by the raw emotion. I shared that journey because I thought it might help other women who were struggling with the same pressures. Not because I wanted praise, not because I was performing honesty for a new audience, because I remembered feeling completely alone when I was going through it. And I didn't want anyone else to feel that way. She looked at Sunny with something that might have been pity, but you've taken something that was genuinely vulnerable and turned it into an indictment. You've made my attempt at honesty into evidence of my privilege, and in doing so, you've made it harder for other women to be honest about their own struggles. Because who wants to share their pain when it's just going to be used against them? Sunny opened her mouth to respond, but Courtney held up a hand. I'm not finished. You brought up Friends. You asked if I've grappled with its lack of diversity. Let me grapple with it right now in front of everyone. Yes, the show could have been more diverse. Yes, I wish it had been. Yes, I benefit from white privilege in ways that I'm still learning to understand. But I also know that in 1994, when that show started, I was just an actress trying to get steady work. I wasn't in a position to demand changes to the show's makeup. I was grateful to have a job. Her voice grew stronger. Does that excuse the show's limitations? No. Does it make me personally responsible for them? I don't think so. But I've used the platform that show gave me to support diverse storytelling ever since. I've produced projects with diverse casts and crews. I've advocated behind the scenes for opportunities for people who don't look like me. That's what I can do. That's what I have done. And if that's not enough for you, I don't know what would be. She straightened her jacket, a gesture that seemed to signal the end of something. I've spent 40 years in this industry. I've been married and divorced. I've raised a daughter. I've watched friends struggle and succeed, and sometimes both at the same time. I've learned that life is complicated, and people are complicated, and reducing anyone to a single narrative does violence to their humanity. She looked at the audience one final time. To everyone watching who has ever felt like they couldn't be honest about their struggles because someone would use it against them, I see you. To everyone who has made choices they regret and is trying to do better, I see you. To everyone who is just trying to survive in a world that seems determined to tear you down, I see you. We're all in this together, even when it doesn't feel like it. She turned back to Sunny one last time. I hope someday you'll understand that calling out isn't the same as lifting up. That accountability without compassion is just cruelty with a better vocabulary. And that the women you're trying to speak for might just want someone to understand their struggles, not weaponize them against other women who are struggling, too. And with that, Courtney Cox walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a studio that seemed to vibrate with the weight of everything that had just been said. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had witnessed. A woman who had spent 40 years being America's friend, who had played neurotic Monica with such precision that people forgot it was acting, had just shown a side of herself that no script had ever called for. Sunny Hostin remained at the table, her expression difficult to read. Whether it was embarrassment or defiance or something more complicated, only she knew. But the other hosts were looking at her with something that wasn't quite approval, and the audience's silence spoke louder than any applause could have. What had started as an interview about a career had become something else entirely. A meditation on aging in public, on the impossible standards women face, on the way we turn every female choice into a referendum on feminism itself. Courtney Cox had come to promote a project, and left having promoted something much more important. The radical idea that women deserve grace, even successful ones, even privileged ones. Even ones who have made mistakes and talked about them publicly. The aftermath of that interview would spark conversations across social media and beyond, about who gets to speak for women, about the difference between holding people accountable and holding them hostage, about whether success should require endless apology or whether survival itself was worthy of respect. And somewhere in all those conversations, a simple truth emerged. Courtney Cox had spent 40 years being whatever the industry needed her to be. On that day, for those minutes, she had finally just been herself. And that self was far more interesting, far more complex, and far more inspiring than any character she had ever played. For those who had grown up watching Monica Geller obsess over cleanliness and cooking, who had cheered for Gail Weathers surviving horror after horror in the Scream franchise, who had seen bits of themselves in every neurotic, driven, imperfect character Courtney had brought to life. There was something deeply moving about watching the woman behind those characters stand up for her own imperfect humanity. She had shown that the perfectionism wasn't just acting. The drive was real, and so was the vulnerability beneath it. And perhaps the most powerful moment wasn't any single thing she said, but the simple fact that she had refused to accept the premise of the attack. She hadn't apologized for surviving. She hadn't flagellated herself for having a career. She had simply insisted on her right to be human, to be complicated, to be both privileged and struggling at the same time. In a world that demanded women be one thing or another, Courtney Cox had insisted on being everything she was. And that, in the end, was the most radical statement of all. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Sunny Hostin out of line, or was she asking questions that needed to be asked? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.